citizen of Wisconsin. Kingdom citizen, kingdom citizen, yeah, yeah, kingdom citizen.
Blessings, everybody. Blessings, blessings, blessings. This is Dr. David D. King with Kingdom Citizens of Wisconsin show, and I am excited about our show tonight. We have some great guests tonight. We will be talking tonight about the two referendums that everybody is trying to figure out, and we just have some great guests on tonight. Couple of things out real quick, and we want to talk to you, just give a couple of announcements. The book of Why It's Important to Stay in the Middle from a Kingdom Perspective. This book is now in 25 states and steady growing. You need to get a copy of this book. It is being translated into Spanish as we speak, and you can call us at 414-676-0842. That's 414-676-0842. And if you are having problems co-parenting, Kingdom Escasia will be willing to work with you and your loved ones to make sure that the children are getting the best care, because children need both parents in their lives. We will counsel, we will minister, we will work with you as parents, that the child can have the benefit of having both parents in their life. And if you having a little issues and you want to make it better for the child, give us a call at 414-585-9511. That's 414-585-9511, or 414-899-2688. That's 414-899-2688. And so we're excited tonight, and I'm looking forward to having these two gentlemen with me tonight, and I'm grateful for one coming, because of the fact that he's coming on. He's very busy. He is the district attorney for Fond du Lac County. He is none other than D.A. Eric Toney.
Hey, good evening. Thank you so much for having me on, and great to see you again. We got to see each other on the trail quite a bit, so it's good seeing you.
Yes, it is great seeing you as well. I'm sorry that neither one of us won, but it was great to be out there with you and listen to your knowledge thing. So I'm excited for having you with me tonight, and it wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for this gentleman I'm about to bring up. He is a ninja from the northwest side of the state of Wisconsin. Don't make him mad, because he would tell you exactly how he feels. Ladies and gentlemen, let me bring my brother from another mother on the show, Jared, a.k.a. J-Rod.
Thanks, David. How you doing, Eric?
Doing great. Great to see you virtually.
Yeah, likewise. We do get around.
Yeah. As you notice, I got a different. You noticed that, right?
You what?
Yep. Come over some more. There you go. I said, you notice I got a new interview every time I introduce you.
Yeah. Yes, you do. So, Eric, we spoke about it a couple days ago.
Everybody is saying. Go ahead, Jeff.
About doing an op-ed on the questions. Did you ever get anything accomplished?
Yep, I just put the finishing touches on that today. I think it'll got a few news outlets I think that are interested in publishing it. I've sent them some draft copies throughout the week and tried to boil it down into these two constitutional amendments that are on the April 4th ballot that address bail in Wisconsin. And I've gotten a lot of people that have asked me about that, and so I decided to write that op-ed to try to give people a little clarity on what it means, where I stand, and why I think it's important that people vote for these op-eds. And we can talk a little bit about that.
Yes, please do.
So
go ahead.
This issue of cash bail to amend our Constitution first came up, at least that I can recall, back in 2017, and it wasn't enough to get the amendment passed. But what I think is helpful to understand is also what the process is to amend our Constitution. And the Wisconsin legislature can pass an amendment to the Constitution in 2 consecutive legislative sessions, joint resolutions. So the Assembly and Senate each have to pass that resolution in 2 separate sessions. And once that's done, then it gets to go on the ballot for the people of Wisconsin to decide, do they want to support the constitutional amendment or not? Now, as you can imagine, sometimes the language is far longer than what could actually be put on a ballot. And so there's an effort to summarize what that amendment is and kind of the legalese on the ballot. So those are ballot questions number 1 and ballot question number 2, excuse me, which are binding constitutional amendments here in Wisconsin. We've seen sometimes there are what we would call non-binding referendums on a ballot. These are binding constitutional amendments. And the last time we saw a constitutional amendment on our ballot was, I believe, in 2020 with Marcy's Law, which was also on the April ballot. So we're coming up on the 3-year anniversary of Marcy's Law passing overwhelmingly here in Wisconsin, which expanded crime victim rights, kind of leveling the playing field for victims and defendants. So as David mentioned, the district attorney of Fond du Lac County. I'm also the president of the Wisconsin District Attorneys Association, which is a bipartisan group of DAs, assistant DAs, and prosecutors across Wisconsin. And in that association, we are supporting this constitutional amendment for bail here in Wisconsin. And what we could do is talk about where bail currently stands and what the Constitution says, and then what these constitutional amendments will do. And the bail system in Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Constitution in Article 1, Section 8 lays out what cash bail can be for. And the Constitution says cash bail can only be used to ensure or assure that a defendant appears in court. And there are other things, what we would call non-monetary conditions. So you could think of like a no contact order, or somebody couldn't go to a certain place. They couldn't go to a bar. Maybe they wouldn't be able to possess alcohol, things like that, that we commonly see in drunk driving cases, things of that nature. Those are called non-monetary conditions that a judge could impose upon someone for a variety of reasons. And one of them is to prevent serious bodily harm to the community. And so the amendments, the first one, it's a really small change. It changes the definition for imposing those non-monetary conditions from serious bodily harm to serious harm. So it just deletes the word bodily, which expands the type of harm that could be protected with some of these non-monetary conditions. Think of emotional harm, property damage, and other types of things. So it's a very small change with a significant impact, adding additional protections that judges can order through what we call those non-monetary bail conditions. But I think the one that's getting, and that's question number 1 on the ballot. So a yes vote to question number 1 would delete the word bodily and expand the protections for harm that can be protected with those non-monetary conditions. So that's what the first one is, and we can talk a little more about that if you'd like.
Yeah. So what is on the books right now, Eric?
So right now, the Wisconsin Constitution says that those non-monetary bail conditions, one of the factors is to prevent serious bodily harm. So there are some other factors in there as well, assuring court appearances, protecting the community. But when you look at protecting the community from, it's currently saying serious bodily harm. So this just deletes the word bodily. So it's serious harm to protect the public or community from serious harm. So it's a very small change. But if you think about bodily harm, you generally think about physical harm. And so when you take away the word bodily harm, it's not just physical harm. It could be emotional damage, property damage, other types of harm that could occur in a community that are not bodily harm. And even you could have a lower level of bodily harm that would now be covered to let judges better protect our communities without imposing cash bail.
All right. I'm just checking to see if we have any questions yet, and nothing as of yet. So shall we go on to the second one?
Yeah, I think this second question that's on the ballot is the one that may generate more interest based on what we've seen across Wisconsin. And this deals with cash bail. And currently the law in Wisconsin, according to our Constitution, says that a judge can only order cash bail to assure the appearance of a defendant in court. That's it. There are no other factors that a judge can consider other than to assure that the defendant appears in court.
Okay.
And so this constitutional amendment changes that. It broadens out what judges can order cash bail for, what factors or criteria they can look at. So there are, I like to say, 5 additional criteria now that the judge would be able to look at when ordering cash bail. And that would be, number 1, the seriousness of the offense charged, the previous criminal record of the accused, the probability the accused will appear in court. So that's similar to what was before. It just changes the verbiage. Then number 4, the need to protect the public from serious harm. So that kind of tracks with ballot question 1 for the non-monetary conditions of serious harm. And then preventing intimidation of witnesses. So those are the 5 things, if we vote yes for ballot question number 2, that broadens out what a judge can consider in ordering cash bail. And this is really important. We really saw this gain a lot of traction in the wake of the Waukesha Parade massacre with Darrell Brooks and the anger and frustration that people had with some of the bail circumstances for Darrell Brooks. Now, one of the things that, I'll go into court, and there are prosecutors across Wisconsin that will do this every day. We'll look at the potential penalties that somebody is facing, their prior criminal record, if they've missed court, shown up to court, they've had cash bond ordered before, substance abuse issues, ties to a community, things that we would say, judge, this person's looking at 50 years in prison or mandatory minimums. Those all create a flight risk and reduce somebody's likelihood or our assurance that they would appear in court, that we use the current language of the Constitution to frame our arguments. And some judges will look at that and say, yes, those are appropriate arguments, and I'm going to order high cash bail over this particular defendant. But unfortunately, we have some judges that will not consider those type of arguments when setting cash bail. They have a very strict, rigid approach of only looking at, maybe the defendant's never missed court before, factors, they've never had an arrest warrant issued. They look at a much more narrow group of factors when deciding if cash bail should be ordered. And so what that results is the cash bail system being different depending on what judge that you are in front of. And that is not a good way for our criminal justice system to operate. And so this kind of levels the playing field and makes sure that cash bail is treated equally across Wisconsin, not depending on what judge we have. And this, we see time after time, some defendants have multiple open cases, they're still on bond, and they're committing new crimes, but they're continuing to show up to court. And a judge might say, well, I'm not going to order high cash because they're still showing up to court and they're not looking at the protection of the public with the bond consideration. So this amendment and voting yes to question number 2 should help take dangerous criminals off the streets by having judges look at these additional factors in making sure that we are protecting the community. And one of the other aspects that we have is there are protections in place for defendants right now. They can file bond motions. If they're unable to post the cash that a judge orders, they can file a motion and tell the court they cannot post it, and they can make an argument for lower cash. A defendant can also make a speedy trial demand. And in a speedy trial demand, if that's not met, the remedy, generally speaking, is that the defendant is released from cash bond. Now, there are some caveats to that based on the interest of justice and complexity of the case, but there are already protections within our statutory framework that will not change with either of these amendments.
That's a mouthful. Did you get all that, David?
One of the questions, I know, right? One of the questions came up, and you hear it, you're a DA, you hear it all the time. One of the questions, how fair would that be a Caucasian American, and they got almost a similar, when we, how is there any, because I know they can't put everything in there to, but
You're kind of choppy. It's hard to hear.
and we know don't like it, it's going to come against it. So how do you what would you say to somebody who's worried about that?
Can you take out the entire question?
Yeah, can you start over there, David? You broke up there pretty bad.
Oh, okay. So the question is, you have an African American and a white person that has the same background, same crime, same everything, and the bail is different, right? Other ones. What would you say to the side who that's happened if they vote yes, that higher than it is the white guy?
You know, I'm in my 11th year as a DA, and I spent, before I got elected DA, about 2.5 years in private practice and did a fair amount of criminal defense work. And so I would, talk with my clients. Some of them would be in custody on cash bail. Some of them would be out of custody. And a common question that I would get asked, I think, Dave, it's kind of similar to what you just asked me. They would say, well, this person's charged with the same crime and they've got this offer, or this is what their bond is. And one of the things that I've learned is there are almost never two cases that are the same, because everybody has different backgrounds, whether it's their age, where they're at in life, what their prior criminal history, if any, might be. There's also the nature of the crime, that somebody could be charged with the same crime, but could have very different facts surrounding those particular crimes. And those are all things that get looked at throughout the entire system. And so here you can have, take one of the issues that we're seeing a lot of is eluding, where people are felony eluding law enforcement in vehicles on our highways. You could have somebody that traveled, 100 yards at 30 miles an hour, but be charged with felony eluding. And you could have somebody that was going 130 miles an hour, cross traffic, doing other things, and charged with felony eluding. We're going to look at both of those circumstances very differently and how we would resolve the case, and what our bond recommendation might be based on the dangerousness of the behavior, the length of time they weren't listening to law enforcement. Even under the current Wisconsin Constitution, we would say if somebody's going to elude from law enforcement for 10, 15 miles at 100 plus miles an hour at various times, they're unlikely to be appearing in court, and we need high cash bond compared to somebody that maybe did it for 100 yards. And so we have to look at each case based on the facts and the circumstances and who that individual and what their history is.
Well, I'm glad you answered it that way, Eric, because that was my next question, is how do you come up with that magical number when it comes to a cash bond? So yeah, I think you kind of laid it out pretty nicely there.
I mean, a lot of the first step that almost any prosecutor is going to look at for a cash bond, apart from potentially the potential penalties, is going to be, does the person have a prior interaction with the criminal justice system? And specifically, have they been to court before? Have they missed court? Have they had arrest warrants before? Maybe they have never missed court before, but have a lengthy criminal record. And the reason they have not missed court is because they had cash bond in cases that maybe was posted. And you could look and say, okay, Your Honor, this person has had prior cases where they've posted cash bond up to $500 in each case, and that has helped assure their appearances in court. And so you might look at that and say that could be an appropriate number depending on the circumstances and the prior history of the person. You could have another defendant that has had cash bond ordered, they've never posted it, has never missed court, and you might think that you need cash bond to assure their appearances based on that prior history. Sometimes you look at, take an intentional homicide, for example, certain sexual assaults or child pornography sixth offense drunk driving, where you've got mandatory minimum prison on those cases. Having somebody that's now facing a mandatory minimum for prison could make them less likely to appear in court, where we would want a higher level of cash bond compared to maybe a second offense drunk driving, where the penalties in the grand scheme of things are significantly less with a small amount of jail. And so those are some of the factors that we look at. Sometimes we look at, are there substance abuse issues? Because I think most people, common sense, know that if somebody is a alcoholic or they're actively in relapse with addiction, they're less likely to appear in court. If somebody doesn't have stable housing, that could impact their ability to show up to court. If somebody's not working, that could impact their ability to show up to court. If they don't live in the community, if they live in another state, that could impact their likelihood or assurance of appearing in court. And so these are factors that, kind of like I mentioned before, as a prosecutor, I'll argue to our judges, and many judges will consider that in the framework of assuring someone's appearance in court under the current Wisconsin Constitution. But we have some judges that will not consider those factors. They simply will look at that very narrow, they've always shown up to court before, they've never had a warrant. And so we're seeing lower cash bonds and seeing people committing crimes on bond multiple times that are continued to be allowed out on lower cash or signature bonds. And so this second question on the ballot really broadens that out to give judges more criteria that they can look at. And one thing I think that's important to note, this constitutional amendment, neither one of them requires a judge to order cash bond, but it does allow them to look at more factors and I think level that playing field across the state.
So my next question is, let's say that you had a $250,000 cash bond on the person. The person pays it, but then does not come back for his assigned court date. So what becomes of that thereafter? Is that where Dog the Bounty Hunter comes in? Or
no, we don't have bail bondsmen in Wisconsin. So when a judge orders cash bond, it's a dollar for dollar payment. And one of the things that we don't talk enough about cash bond is there are, oftentimes in cases there are victims, and they could, in a homicide, there are costs that there's the emotional trauma of losing a loved one, but then there are costs that a victim family may incur with funeral expenses and other things. Somebody could, in a hit and run, the damage to their vehicle, a battery where someone is punched if they have to go to the hospital. Somebody has their purse stolen, their home burglarized. There are costs associated with that the victim is out money as a result of that crime committed upon them to no fault of their own. So if somebody posts cash bond, that money at the conclusion of the case with conviction first goes to the victim for a recompense or restitution to try to make the victim whole. If there's money left over, it goes to any of the court costs or fines that would be associated with the case. And then any money left over to that would go to the poster. And so if somebody, to your question, Jared, they didn't show up, normally what a prosecutor would do is file what we would call an oral motion in court to forfeit the bond. And so sometimes you could do a written motion, but normally it would just be an oral motion on the record. The judge then has to schedule the hearing for a forfeiture hearing. And then it's at that forfeiture hearing where the judge has to make a determination. Are they going to forfeit the bond? Are they going to do something else? Was there a good reason that someone missed court? Sometimes a judge may reinstate the cash. Maybe the judge will do something different. The poster, sometimes it's not the defendant that posted. It could be family or friends. That individual has the opportunity to actually come to court and make a pitch to the judge if they didn't want the money to be forfeited.
Gotcha.
And there's actually an interesting caveat. You mentioned the Dog the Bounty Hunter. If somebody has cash bond posted there's a provision where they can actually kind of sort of rearrest the defendant and turn them into the sheriff and get the bond money back.
David, you broke up there for a second. You were saying? Uh-oh.
I said, you and I need to start a bounty hunter and go after folks.
There you go. My friends call me Cash. Eric, I've always wanted to ask you this question.
I don't know what's going on with me.
I'm not sure, but you're lagging.
Go
bad.
ahead, J-Rod.
I've been wanting to ask Eric this question for quite some time now. Do you ever go into local high schools, Eric, and speaking in front of kids?
Yeah, we'll get classes that will ask me to come in or do Zoom. We don't get a ton of those, but some of the local government classes will ask us to, have me come in as a speaker. And one of our former state representative, Jeremy Thiesfeld, who recently retired, is teaching at one of our local Christian schools. And we've talked about having me come in to some of those classes. And sometimes we'll do college classes as well with Ripon College, Marion University here in Fond du Lac County.
Sure. So we all know the Kelly Janet debate. How did you feel about that coming out of it? I felt pretty good.
Yeah, I missed, I think, the first 10 minutes or so of the debate, but I thought Justice Kelly did a fantastic job. I mean, a big takeaway, you can tell his view is rooted in the rule of law and fairness and not imposing his personal beliefs or values on anybody. That if you come before him as a judge, he's going to look at the facts and apply the law. That's what he's going to do, not what he wants it to be. And when you hear Judge Protasewicz, that is very unclear based on the statements she's made in the past about her thumb being on the scale in certain circumstances, saying that the maps are rigged and other comments that she's made, which would give any litigant in any of those cases, I think, concern on whether she would be fair and impartial in making those decisions. And I can tell you just a practical experience as a district attorney. When we walk into a courtroom, we want judges to be making their legal decisions based on the law and the facts in the case, not personal opinions. And so we were prosecuting a cold case homicide back in 2016, and it was a very challenging case because the victim's body was recovered many weeks after she was killed and left outside in the summer. And so there wasn't an apparent cause of death, and the defendant wasn't identified until over 20 years later. And we could not tell the jury how she died. And generally that's very helpful to do if you're charging someone with intentional homicide. And so we ended up with a hung jury for the trial with one holdout juror. And the defense filed a motion trying to get the judge to essentially direct a verdict in favor of the defendant, which was denied during the trial. But then what we learned was that after the mistrial was called, the judge went back and made comments to the jurors about that particular motion. And he did that outside the presence of the prosecutors as well as the defense attorneys. And then we learned that the judge may have made some comments to some of the court clerks as well about that particular motion. So what we had was, it appeared that the judge was sharing the opinion of what the judge should do on a legal issue, which then was a motion to reconsider had been brought before the judge. And so those were those communications made about specific facts of the case outside the presence of the party. And so that gave a concern of, are we going to get a decision based on the law and the facts, or are there things that are being done outside the presence of the parties? And I think that judge I have great regard for the judge and his integrity, who's now retired, but I have to also look at the victims and the interests of the public, which the district attorney represents. And so I made the decision to file a request asking that judge to recuse himself from the case based on those comments. And I give the judge a lot of credit because he did recuse himself, understanding the issue that created. And that's why it's so important that we don't have judges and candidates for office going out campaigning, talking about how they're going to rule on issues and things like that, which we see Judge Protasewicz doing. That should be offensive to everybody, regardless of your political views, because that's not what we expect from judges based on the judicial code here in Wisconsin and the impact that can have on litigants.
Very well said. I did you catch that part where Dan Kelly said how much money that the Democratic Party had thrown into that mix? And she said that she would recuse herself if there was any issues regarding I don't know what the.
Yeah. So what you're getting at is the Democratic Party has donated at least over $2.5 million to Judge Protasewicz through pass through, where people can donate unlimited money to our state parties, and the state parties can transfer unlimited funds to candidates. And so Judge Protasewicz has said she'll recuse herself from any case in which the Democratic Party of Wisconsin is a party. And that's such a hollow response, in my opinion, because what about any abortion group that is spending hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars for Judge Protasewicz that has the same impact? The money's just not going directly into her campaign. She's not saying that she'll recuse herself from those cases. She's not saying she'll recuse herself from cases that a decision could have an impact on the Democratic Party or the cornerstones of that party. It's the same concept. And so she's playing, I think, a loose game with that, trying to score political points for it. And we have a recusal rule right now. And that is more liberal with our circuit court judges, because you can often have another judge that will take over. But when you get up to the Court of Appeals, or especially the Wisconsin Supreme Court, when a judge recuses themselves, there is no one else to step in. And that's why we have a recusal rule in place. And when we elect judges and other elected officials, we expect them to be able to hear those cases and do so fairly and impartially without imposing their values upon us.
In my opinion, he did not leave any meat on the bone. She opened the door, and Dan Kelly, I think he did an amazing job. As a matter of fact, if you could have seen it here, Eric, I was high-fiving myself. I got so excited, literally. Yeah, I thought he did an outstanding job, very thorough in his replies. And the one thing, my biggest takeaway is he did not hesitate to answer. He was very spot on.
I think he was prepared, and his team did a wonderful job getting him ready for that forum. And one of the things I know we've heard people say, well, he can't win and that kind of thing. And I don't buy that for 1 second. Dan Kelly can absolutely win this race. And I've seen him all over the state, and he's tired. And he's tired because of how hard he is working. And that's exactly what you want to see from a statewide candidate this close to a general election. You want them tired because they're leaving it all on the field, traveling all across the state, reaching as many voters as they possibly can. And we know Janet Protasewicz, she's been beaten before, and it happened in Milwaukee County in a judicial race. So just think about that for a moment. This left-wing judicial candidate was beaten in Milwaukee County, and that was by Supreme Court Justice Rebecca Bradley for a circuit court seat. And I think that was about 10 years ago this April where that happened. So she's been beaten before. It's been done, and it can be done as long as everyone gets out. If you can vote early or absentee, I'll be doing that actually next week, Thursday. I'll be voting early because I'm going to be on vacation, and I'm not coming back until Election Day, and I'm not going to risk the potential that my plane won't get here in time, or I won't get back to Fond du Lac before the polls close. So I'll be voting early, and I hope you'll take that opportunity to get out an early vote for Dan Kelly for Supreme Court and vote yes for those 2 constitutional amendment questions on the ballot.
My next question, what is the importance of voting early so people have a better understanding?
Yeah. So there's a lot of reasons to vote early. And I think about, I just gave you my example of why I'm voting early. You think about, some people, they don't live where they work, and they have to make a specific plan to go and vote. If something comes up at work, family, or other issues, they have a bad day that they forget, because it's not the top priority for everybody. There are many people that it is, and they haven't missed an election in decades. But for some people, they really have to make that plan. And if we can get them to vote early, we bank that vote moving forward. If we can get someone to vote absentee, we bank that vote moving forward. And there's a special reason for how helpful that is, because the political parties, they can see who has voted early or absentee. That information is available. And that means if you know that one of your conservatives have voted, you don't have to spend money targeting that person to get them to vote. If one of our voters has registered for an absentee ballot, we can specifically target them with text messages and other things to try to get them to get that vote back in. So it saves money where it can be targeted on people that maybe otherwise don't always vote. And it also starts to help show us how many votes do we have in? What work is left to be done? Because we're not losing elections because of our ideas or our values. We are losing elections because we are being out organized by the left. And I am tired of seeing that happen because too many people are working too hard across the state trying to help elect candidates. Both David and I experienced that on a statewide level with so many people that invested in us. And, I was incredibly fortunate to have made it through that primary into the general election and lost narrowly, but people across Wisconsin actually helped me get more votes than any Republican constitutional office candidate has ever gotten in one of our midterm elections before.
Is that right?
We still came up short. And that means we have more work to be done, and we can do it by out organizing the left because we're losing by narrow margins. So just imagine if we organize better than them. As an example, Ron Johnson, I think there was about a 300,000 vote difference between his 2016 reelection and 2022. That's 300,000 voters out there that could be voting Republican up and down the ticket that we need to try to find ways to get them to vote early or absentee in these midterm elections, because that is such a huge number that could swing, obviously, an election in our favor. And so these are some common sense things that we need to start doing that I know there's consternation where some people, it's just they're always going to vote on election day. And if that's you, please get out there and vote on election day, but try to help get some others to vote early or absentee.
So, David, I hate to steal the show from you, but I've got a lot of questions. Young people, how do we get them involved?
So we have to make the connections and reach out, and we're starting to see that, Turning Point USA, Turning Point Action, they're getting more involved here in Wisconsin. And from what we're hearing, that's going to start to be a bit of a priority, but we can't abandon the colleges and the universities. We have to make that outreach and make sure that we're being active, even on social media where we see young people on, and making sure we're getting messages that speak to them as well, making sure that we are reaching out and not taking it for granted and not just saying, oh, Dane County or Madison is lost or Milwaukee is lost, because there are huge numbers of conservatives in both of those counties. And we have to make sure that we are reaching out, not just to the young people, but everybody in those counties, because we know it's a little tough with how some of the universities are structured right now, but we have to keep chipping away, because if we make progress in all of these areas with how narrow these statewide margins are, that really starts to turn the tide.
And David, I think you could probably attest for what he's talking about in the Milwaukee area as far as conservatives and reaching them. There is quite a number of conservatives down that way, correct? David?
Oh yeah, it's a number of. Can you hear me?
Yes. Kind of.
Can you?
About every other word.
Of conservatives, they just doesn't line up going on here. Okay, I'll fix it. Hold on one second.
Holding.
But, when we look at the, Dane County and Milwaukee County, we know Waukesha County, and we talk about that as well as Washington and Ozaukee, because we usually have huge margins in our favor of conservative Republican votes. But when you look at the total number of conservatives that often vote in Dane and Milwaukee, it's huge. We just get swamped by even more Democrat votes, but there are still huge numbers of Republicans voting, and we have to find ways to continue to reach out to them. But we're seeing, central, northern, western Wisconsin, Derek Van Orden, a great result, 3rd congressional, winning that seat, that we're seeing those conservatives in other parts of our state. It just can be harder for us to reach those voters because they're not as compact as voters are in, Madison or Milwaukee. So it's harder for us to reach some of these voters. And that's what really helps with early and absentee voting, because we've got those votes banked in with people that are harder to reach because they're just spread out further.
Sure. I just had now it escapes me. I was going to ask you something else, but getting back to the youth, and maybe not even so much the youth, but my friends, I hear it all the time, well, my vote don't count. You know, we continuously lose, and I get the frustration, but you still have to push forward and make it happen.
You know, we will lose elections and we will win elections, and I don't know what will happen on April 4th. You know, I am praying that Dan Kelly pulls it off. These constitutional amendments are passed, but if we lose, we get back up, we figure out what happened, we fix it, and we keep pushing forward because there is no other alternative. You know, that's what we do. We push forward, we get back up, and we find ways to win by the laws that we have before us. And there's really no other option. And I know people put their heart and soul into these races and how disappointing these losses can be. But we can't afford to give up because we know the stakes are too high. And, you know, I have seen the hard work that our grassroots put in across Wisconsin, and I know they're doing it right now to try and help elect Dan Kelly. We've got, you know, school board races, a mayoral race in Green Bay, and I think down in Racine, and some other important local races that people need to make sure they're getting out there and voting. You know, even I got a friend of mine that's running for school board, Megan Heinzelman in Mequon-Thiensville. Make sure to get out and vote for these local candidates, research them beforehand, make sure you know who those good conservative candidates are.
Outside of free everything, what is it that the Republican Party could wrap its head around and getting the carrot out in front of the horse, so to speak, you know, to lead people? I last year we had a tremendous amount of awesome candidates from across the board, and I can't fathom the idea of putting more Democratic people in there. I could understand it if maybe they were more moderate leaning, but their policies suck. And I cannot wrap my head around how they keep getting these votes from people. I don't get it. It's empty promises.
Think about like a high school class.
Justin, can you hear me now?
Yes. Like just maybe a simple example, like a 30 kid, you know, class where people go to vote for class president over the lunch hour. And one kid doesn't do anything and just goes and shoots hoops, and the other kid's going up to everybody, hey, make sure to get in there and vote. Did you go and vote for me yet? And doing all that organizing. And maybe the other person would have done a much better job and had the ideas, but they didn't get their people to the polls. And that's what we're seeing right now. It's not that we're not getting our people. The left is just out organizing us and doing far better at the, you know, they've got the relational organizing right now where they're using text messaging and apps to do those kind of things. And we have to find ways to catch up and not put our focus on the things that don't matter, or have the, you know, turning the guns inward on ourselves, because we have had some toxic primaries last year that made it more difficult for us in the general election. You didn't see that on the left, and they've had primaries. Sometimes they cleared the field right before the election, but we have Republicans attacking Republicans. If we're attacking ourselves, how can we complain if the news media is attacking us? Because we are doing it to ourselves. And we need to start policing ourselves, having positive messages in our primaries that debate the issues, and still have vigorous primaries, but not have those vicious primaries that make it more difficult for us to consolidate around that candidate. We have to be about winning general elections, not about winning primaries.
And you're 100% right when you said that we attack ourselves. You never, ever see the Democratic Party going after one of their own. Never. They just don't. They save their energy and conserve it for the end.
And you know, I've made the commitment. I don't support candidates in primaries that will do that type of attacking. And I will gladly support them in the general election. But we have to start policing ourselves and holding our candidates to that high standard that we expect so that we can win general elections.
Yeah. David, I could hear a little bit, but you're still broke up for some reason.
You know, there is one issue I want to make sure we
I'm trying to use my call in to see.
Oh, now we got you. Kind of. Maybe not. Did you forget to pay your electric bill?
Say J-Rock?
I said, did you forget to pay your electric bill?
No, I don't.
So one,
No, I don't know what is breaking.
Because David, you're still pretty hard to hear right now. But as we kind of started out on cash bail, public safety, we've talked about the Supreme Court. One of the issues we have is really a crisis in Wisconsin with prosecutors. We're unable to recruit and retain prosecutors across Wisconsin, and it's in large part because of the pay. So how much do you think an assistant district attorney makes per hour starting?
I haven't the foggiest.
$27.24 an hour. And we are seeing, we can't recruit new students out of law school. They go to corp councils, city attorneys' offices, the private sector, because they're not going to work for $27.24 an hour. And we have a retention issue as well. A 10-year period, 2012 to 2022, we had about a 59% turnover, with now 65% of our prosecutors at that time with less than 10 years of experience. During Governor Evers' time as governor so far, 25 elected district attorneys have resigned during office because some of them can make $20,000, $30,000 more as an assistant district attorney. And so we have to fix the pay issues for our assistant DAs. And so with the Wisconsin District Attorneys Association, we're seeking to have that starting pay increased to $35 an hour, with that corresponding $7.76 increase for our current prosecutors. The same thing for our public defenders. We want to make sure we've got great public defenders protecting the rights of the accused and making sure with a conviction, it's not going to come back on appeal. And then making sure that we have pay progression for our prosecutors. And one of the interesting things when people think about somebody getting a raise, it's different for prosecutors. Number one, it has to be funded by the legislature. Number two, the elected DA has to do an evaluation with the prosecutor, and it's merit-based. So the prosecutor has to qualify for it, and then the DA can elect how much of that bucket of money they're going to give to individual prosecutors as well. And so it's a true merit-based system that we have for pay progression. And that's our number one priority with the Wisconsin DAs Association in this upcoming state budget, is getting that pay for prosecutors addressed so we can fix the recruitment and retention issue, because law enforcement can do all of the best things and take dangerous criminals off the streets. And we need great prosecutors on the back end to shepherd these cases through the system to keep our community safe.
Now, I know you're making more than $27 an hour because you got an awful good shine on them shoes you wear.
Well,
you just looked at the shine on your shoes right now.
Yeah. And the problem we have, it's our assistant district attorneys. That's the biggest. We have assistants, then we have deputies, and then we have the elected district attorneys. And the top end pay for an assistant DA is but the $27 an hour it breaks down to a salary where it's just over $50,000. So they don't get overtime. And I can tell you, almost no assistant district attorney will work 40 hours. They will be prosecuting sexual assaults, homicides. When you're doing those type of cases, you never feel like you've put in enough work. We lose prosecutors that just, they don't have that work-life balance because they know there's always more to do.
So I see Steve Brigham posted a comment there. I'm just curious because I don't know, to go to law school, what is the price tag on something like, I don't know, you've been out of it for a number of years, but maybe you got a pretty good number in your head yet.
Yeah, so it'll depend on what school you go to, but you're easily going to be, I would say $30,000-$40,000 a year that somebody's going to be shelling out for law school right now, depending on scholarships that somebody might get. And if you're, UW Madison is going to be a little bit or quite a bit cheaper probably than Marquette as a public school. But a lot of law students are going to be that 30 to 40. And that was about when I was in school. So it could be even more, and it'll depend on what school somebody goes to. That doesn't even include the college that somebody would have paid for as well, potentially. So there's a significant cost, and people become prosecutors because they want to make a difference in protecting our communities. They're not doing it to get rich, but we know we're continuously losing prosecutors. And we did a market study where we looked at neighboring states to see what that pay is, as well as assistant corporation counsel. And that all averaged out to $35 an hour. So probably nearly $8 an hour more than what we're paying our assistant DAs right now.
And that's a 4-year degree, or is it long?
3-year degree for,
Okay.
generally speaking, 3 years for law school, and then 4, maybe 5 years, depending on your speed through college.
Sure. So that said, college is not for everyone, and I ain't even going to tell you what we do with in the operators union, but I tell you, getting out there, and like I said, college is not for everybody, but to find an apprenticeship program, I think it'll be a good thing for a lot of people, and you make money going forward. I've got both of my sons right now are going through the apprenticeship program, and to me, when I went through it, it is worth every red cent, because I am not college material at all. I'll leave it to smart people like you.
Well, you think about, folk right out of high school that get those type of jobs or start on that career. And if they get to work and the money they're making, and if they start investing that appropriately, the difference they can make in the long term for their future without having sometimes what can be crushing student loan and debt. And we see, this proposal from President Biden, the $20,000 proposal. It's a Band-Aid that doesn't stop the bleeding, doesn't fix the problem. And it just shows the lack of seriousness, where the cost of a college degree is just skyrocketing, making it even less likely that some should probably consider not going to college. Because, I'll give you I went to St. Norbert. I graduated in 2006. My guess is the tuition probably at the time was around, I'll just ballpark it, $30,000. Think about somebody going to St. Norbert for $120,000 after 4 years to be a teacher. And teachers, they're not getting rich doing that. Probably not the school somebody should have a teaching degree from, compared to what it would cost at a UW school. But then you get these students that are coming out with that crushing debt to become a teacher or another job that may not pay, what they might need to cover the cost of their education. Yeah.
So on that subject, do you see in your field, with the pay rate that it is, as it is, do you see, like, I hate to say this, but are we lowering the bar and lowering the standard?
My office is not. We won't hire somebody just to hire somebody. We will look for the right people that fit the culture and atmosphere of our office, and it's becoming more and more difficult to do. I just lost about a week or so ago now. One of my attorneys got hired by a corporation counsel's office to make more money and work 4 days a week with less stress. We're seeing, a county nearby me has lost 2 of their attorneys to a city attorney's office. The Dodge County DA's office earlier this year had no prosecutors in the office, literally 0, where other people had to come in, step up, and help out. The Sheboygan DA's office, about 30 to 40% staffing. Earlier last year, I think it was, the O'Connell County DA's office had no prosecutor in the office, where Brown County had to take over that office. Where even some of these smaller offices that can't recruit somebody, where maybe they're down 1 person, but it's only a 2 or 3 prosecutor office, that's a huge chunk to take out of that office. And, I've been doing these calls with our DAs to update them on the budget. And there are still DAs that know they could leave and make more money as an ADA, but they care so much about what they're doing that they're not leaving. But I'm worried that will change, because if you have a DA that leaves to become an ADA and an ADA that gets appointed as the DA, we're still down a position. And it's like shuffling the chairs on the deck of the Titanic. It's still going down, and we haven't added anything to it. I will say, I've had tremendous conversations with members of the legislature. We appreciated aspects of the governor's budget as well. And I'm cautiously optimistic that we're going to see something incredibly impactful done in the upcoming budget, but we don't have specific commitments as of yet.
So do you think that a lot of it's due to the COVID, that now people have figured out ways to work around not going into the office? So they're sitting on the couch eating bonbons and drinking Mountain Dew all day?
Not for prosecutors. They're finding jobs that pay them more money, and tens of 20, 30,000. I mean, I think one of the stories I just heard today was the prosecutor might have been making 70 to 80,000, and then to go to the city attorney's office ended up at 6 figures. Who's going to turn down $20,000 to $30,000 to work in the same community with less stress and making that much more money. It is very difficult for somebody to turn down when they're raising a family and they're not sure what will happen with their profession. And so we've got incredibly dedicated, motivated prosecutors, and many of them, when they leave the profession, it is an incredibly difficult decision for them because they care so much about their cases, working with law enforcement, protecting the community. They're not easy decisions, but when they're raising a family and they have that opportunity, I can't fault them for taking advantage of that. And so just making that pitch to try to get this right so we can retain and recruit really good prosecutors to help keep our community safe.
So being you just kind of hit on the sheriff's department, and you probably see it a lot more than I have, but we kind of run in the same circles. And from what I hear, they're having a heck of a time with recruitment as well.
It's a huge challenge for law enforcement. It's been like this for a few years now, where they would get dozens and dozens of applications and qualified applicants, where now the applicants are very few, the qualified applicants even less. And then it's a scramble to try to get that person in as quickly as you can, because another agency is likely to hire that officer. And we've seen officers retiring. Police officers can sometimes retire around 50, depending on the years of service that they have in, and they're retiring earlier. We would have officers sticking around until late 50s, 60s. That becomes less and less prevalent now. And so we're losing such experienced, good officers, and these young officers are now being put in incredibly dangerous situations, whether it's somebody with a firearm, the dangerous eluding, where people are traveling at incredibly high rates of speed. We saw from about 2019, we had about 15 of these felony eludings on the highway referred to my office to prosecute. And then over the last 2 years, that's tripled to like 45 and 48 of them. And these are incredibly dangerous to law enforcement, to the people on our roadways. And we've just seen that, and the officers sometimes are having to follow these people going the wrong way on a 70, 55 mile an hour highway, putting themselves in harm's way. And so it's not a wonder it's not the most popular thing to do, but we still have amazing police officers here in Wisconsin. They're working to not compromise their hiring standards as well. And it's something that we have to all get through together and address it in the budget as best we can. I know there are issues, though. We have a surplus, but a lot of it could be from that one-time COVID or ARPA money. We don't know what's going to happen with the economy later this year, with some predicting a recession. So I know the legislature is looking to be responsible with the budget, still address public safety without having to look at some type of massive cuts in the subsequent budget.
Tiny, you got any questions for Eric? I don't know. David, are you good now? Maybe froze up. I still think a lot of it's got to do with COVID, Eric, to be completely honest with you. Where I work, it not so much, but this younger generation, if they don't get their ass in gear, holy moly, they're in trouble. They're already so far behind.
Yeah, I think, I put prosecutors in one area, but we know people that left the workforce and we're struggling to find people to fill positions, restaurants, stores. The hours are shortened. They're closed different days because they can't find the staff or the employees, or when they are open, they just don't have enough staff. And it's just one of those things that, when you're out at a restaurant or a business, try to be patient, because could be a small business owner. They're doing everything they can. They might be working 7 days a week trying to keep things afloat because they can't find the staff to hire. And it's something I think for all of us to try to remember when we're out and about shopping, because it is, as you said, Jared, it's hard. And, COVID seems to have changed things when people left, and we don't seem to perhaps see as many people coming back into the workforce.
I know there was talk, and I don't know if they actually did it. But you were talking about retirees. We were through our union. There was talk that they were going to bring the retirees back and hire them back and put them to work, because all the way around Wisconsin, not so much my place of employment, but around the state, they're struggling.
Yeah. So we actually have retired prosecutors working in my office and other offices across Wisconsin that they come and work, kind of full time or maybe 15, 20 hours a week because they've got a cap on the number of hours they can work in retirement. And I know there are some even on the Republican side that are looking to modify that cap in some way so that we can have some of these really good employees that retired come back to help the worker shortage that we have, which we've been fortunate to have some very good retired prosecutors helping out, or some people that would have retired that went down to part-time. And so that's been really helpful for DAs all across Wisconsin.
So do you get help out with other counties then as well? Or do you just pretty much stay right where you're at?
So we do special prosecutions. I'm actually really glad you asked that because, when we have our public defenders, if any of them are listening, they'll correct me, but they have a point system of, they get assigned a case. And once they get so many cases in a week or a month, they kind of hit their quota for points and they're not really taking on new cases. Now, for a prosecutor, a DA's office, we don't have a point system or a quota. We have to take every case that comes through and make a decision on it one way or another. We don't get to say, well, once we hit 100 cases for the week, we're done, or for the month. We just have to keep trying to move through those cases. Now, sometimes a DA or their office will have a conflict on a case where they can't prosecute it. So then for the public defenders, when they have a conflict, they find private attorneys to take those cases. Sometimes on a more serious case, they may find another public defender's office to take it. For DAs, we have to find another DA in almost every circumstance to take one of those cases, even if it's a speeding ticket. And so I've prosecuted cases in probably 10, 15 different counties across the state. On Monday, I was in a Dodge County case in Washington County on a special prosecution. So we have DAs that help out all across Wisconsin taking cases. I've gone as far as Richland County, actually, for a couple cases for a special prosecution.
Oh, no kidding.
All the way up to Brown County.
Interesting. So the rise on crime, have you seen since COVID, has that blown up?
The type of crime, we're seeing more serious crime. Sometimes the shootings, drug overdose deaths have skyrocketed. We were 2020, I think, was a record year for us. 2021 would have been a record year, I think, if not for 2020. That's common across Wisconsin, where we saw heroin transition basically into fentanyl, where the cartel started pushing fentanyl across the border, where people are trying to buy heroin, but they're being sold fentanyl instead, which is much more potent form of an opioid, leading to a huge surge in overdose deaths and other overdoses. We're also seeing fentanyl in meth. We're seeing it in cocaine. We're seeing it in marijuana. We're seeing it mixed in with all kinds of different types of drugs. And that's partly why we have to get our border under control, because we are seeing those drugs just pour across the southern border. And we are just seeing record levels in our seizures from fentanyl, methamphetamine. And so the drugs have been a huge uptick. There also seems to be, we just had our sheriff doing a presentation to my office today that we've been working on for probably almost a month on the eluding cases. And one of my staff asked, why are we seeing this change in behavior? And, I don't think anybody can scientifically say it's X, Y, or Z other than anecdotal things where there seems to be at times maybe a lack of respect for authority, and not just law enforcement, but authority in general that seems to radiate to other parts of society. One of the things I will say from my experience in private practice, representing defendants, having, very candid conversations with them, people know where the line is. I mean, when you have children, they kind of know where the line is for mom and dad and what they can get away with or not. And if grandpa and grandma come over to babysit, maybe they can push that line a little further, right? It's not to say criminals are children, but it's a similar concept that they start to understand where is the line with their probation agent? Where is the line with what the police can do? Where is the line with what the prosecutor will do? Where is the line with what the judge will do? And I'll give you a great example. When we see these eluding cases, we're literally seeing people going through medians, snow-covered medians against oncoming traffic. And the reason they'll blow multiple stop signs because there have been policies in some jurisdictions at times that they wouldn't pursue if certain things were done or the behavior got so dangerous. So they started to see where that line was and said, well, if I do this, they won't pursue. And people think if it's one county that won't do it, then it's every county that won't do it. Where Fond du Lac County, they do pursue, we will pursue, you will be caught. And we have a policy in our office for these eluding cases. It's a mandatory prison recommendation. So if somebody is going to elude law enforcement in Fond du Lac County, absent special circumstances, there will be a prison recommendation from my office, given the danger that that poses to society and our law enforcement.
So at a state level that you're kind of at, what is Tony Evers doing about this coming into Wisconsin? I mean, the border is one thing, but what is their department administration? What are they doing to stop it? Anything?
That probably would be a really good question to ask the governor's office, because I can't give you specifics. I am quite confident they would feel that they might be doing something. The best thing I can do is say, at least in the state budget, the governor's office did propose additional prosecutors here in Wisconsin based on what some district attorneys have recommended and the majority of what was being looked for to address the pay. So there were some positive signs that we saw for prosecutors in that budget as we continue to work with the Republican legislature as well for their budget proposal in the hopes of making that significant investment to stop the retention and recruitment issues that we are having.
So my next question that pops into my head, are these George Soros funded prosecutors? I'm just saying, I don't know where
what I can tell you, Jared, is George Soros will never donate a penny to me for district attorney, given how we do in Fond du Lac County.
Good. I just had to throw it in there. I'm kind of a smart ass if he didn't already.
Well, I mean, you look at what we're seeing in New York right now with this grand jury proceeding that has some of the most dubious, tortured legal logic that I've seen, regardless of what anybody thinks of President Trump. When I traveled around the state, I would talk about the rule of law, and the rule of law is what separates America from the world. That's partly what makes our country so special in our republic, the rule of law, that we don't pick and choose when we're going to enforce it or for who we are going to enforce it for, that we treat people equally under the law, regardless of who they are. And it starts to feel, based on the reports that we're seeing from some of the legal experts, and enough information seems to have been leaked, that there's a pretty good idea of the legal theory that's being presented by this district attorney, that they're looking at that 2016, the payment from apparently from President Trump to his then attorney, who then paid it to Stormy Daniels, that it was logged as a legal expense. So they're trying to say that was an improper bookkeeping, which would generally be a misdemeanor crime. Well, that can become a felony if it's done to avoid another crime of some sort. And the crime they seem to be looking at, from what we're seeing, is a federal campaign finance violation. And that's when it really becomes a dubious, tortured logic, at least from the reports we're seeing right now. I don't have all the facts. I can only go off of the news reports that we're seeing, like everyone else. But from everything we've heard, the federal prosecutor said they didn't believe they had a case there. And when you see some of these types of cases at the federal level, where you kind of see it in these misconduct in office cases, where you often have to prove that it's when somebody is taking certain steps. Take a governor, for example, and a legislature that would pass a tax cut. Well, that has a political benefit for them, but they're not getting charged with misconduct in public office. There can be other reasons that something is done. And if those payments were made, maybe he didn't want his wife to know about it. Maybe he didn't want it to affect business interests. I don't know. But that makes it very difficult to prove that type of crime based on some of the federal court decisions that we've seen as well. And just even supporters of the district attorney and attorneys in New York seem to be casting significant doubt on the legal gymnastics that are being attempted right now.
So is he trying to just make a name for himself, in your opinion?
I don't know why it's being done, and they may have evidence and information that we don't know about that makes it a rock solid case. That's just not anything we've been hearing in the public, and we've seen a whole lot of leaks come out on this type of thing so far with a grand jury having been impaneled. So, but there could be other evidence out there that I don't know about. But from what we're hearing so far, it doesn't seem to pass the smell test. But that could change as more facts come out.
Sure. So, and a lot of people, and I'm sure you see it too, especially at the federal level, that there's a two-tiered justice system in this country. How that ever become is beyond me. What's your take on that?
I'm not, the federal prosecutors often, when they get a case, it's got a bow wrapped around it on a silver platter. They've got immense, fantastic investigators from federal agencies, work with some of the DEA, ATF, FBI agents, even, which I know they get knocked around right now. But these frontline agents, they're wonderful people. I've worked with so many of them that care about public safety. They've made a difference in my community and taking dangerous criminals off the streets. And so these federal cases, they have tremendous investigative resources that give them great cases. Now, when we look at state court, our law enforcement is often stretched to the brink and beyond, where they don't have all of the time in the world to investigate each and every case to the degree that they would like. And so there's a significant difference in state court and federal court in what we see. And that's also why our cash bail systems are different, because there will be some people that will argue, well, we should do what the federal system does, where they basically have you're detained in custody or you're out without bail. And that doesn't take into account, at least in state court, the significant difference in the types of cases that we have and the volume of cases compared to what we would often see in federal court compared to the number of prosecutors.
That's a mouthful in itself, too. Son of a gun, Eric, I sure wish that you'd have gotten that job a year ago when you were at, oh, dang it. But there's always next time, right?
Well, I'll tell you, a lot of people ask me or make really kind comments like that, which I truly appreciate. But I spent, some time outside that week getting caught up in my yard, getting the leaves taken care of for the fall, cleaning up my house. And then I went back to work on Monday. The thing that took the biggest adjustment was just the sheer volume of people that I would continue to talk with and how invested they were in me, my race, my team, and helping us try to win that office. And that's a very special bond, Jared. That's how we got to know each other and continue to stay in touch. And
yeah,
that's the thing that took me longer to process, just realizing those relationships and friendships that were built, and forever grateful for that. And we'll see what happens in the future. All I can say is the fire still burns bright.
That's good. I have to ask, Eric, how old are you?
39.
Oh shit, young. Yeah. I know I would not want to be on the other side of that bench from you. That's for doggone sure. Again, keep on with the good fight. And I hope other people get encouraged to get out there and help with, especially right now with Dan Kelly. I know David King, he's had Dan Kelly on his show, and many people. And I think by getting our voices heard, if we back this conversation up 10 years ago, Eric, you and I aren't talking.
We've seen I think a huge change with, social media, not always the best, but it helps us do things like this. And, you hit it. We got to get out there and support Dan Kelly, vote for him. If you got a few extra dollars, $25, $50, $10, get that donation into him. And also just a recap for these constitutional amendments. Ballot question 1 just changes the harm from serious bodily harm to serious harm that a judge can order non-monetary conditions for. And the yes vote to that ballot question number 2 changes and broadens out what judges can consider when setting cash bail. Both of them improve our bail system. The Wisconsin District Attorneys Association, a bipartisan group of prosecutors that I lead right now, supports it. And believe it or not, both Supreme Court candidates also support it.
Very good. At that, I don't know, David, you have anything to add? Maybe not.
Well, I just hope, David, I can come back
Well,
on when we
can you hear me?
Yes. Maybe.
Can y'all hear me now? Well, Eric, as soon as I fix this, I want you back on the show. As soon as I can
Amen, my friend.
figure out what's going on with my, you know, without get the people to vote for Dan Kelly. I think time out to come on the show to Tuesday night we went from a couple state. You know, people need to what's going on. So I'm glad they're running down, and we all gonna go vote yes now. And so hopefully we get everybody else to go and vote yes as well. And J-Rod, thank you for taking over the show. You know, you're always a bully anyway, but thank you for taking
hopefully I didn't chop it up too bad.
And co-hosting the show.
Well, I appreciate you having
you did pretty good. And I don't know what's happening. My MacBook died on me, so I'm using HP right now, and it's doing all of this damage to me. So I'm gonna have to run out real quick and get another MacBook so it can go back crisp. But I'm grateful and honored to have both of you guys here with me to talk about stuff like this and those that I you know all over the state. And I had told the primary that I was supporting attorney. I was going to make sure that support me, know that we would get out and support him for district attorney. So I think and on with us. Milwaukee, there is a lot of conservatives in Milwaukee, like you guys were saying. You're about to see them come out the woodworks as I run for mayor in the city of Milwaukee. But we also have a lot of progressive people that is supporting me for mayor in the city of Milwaukee as well, because they know one side is not going to fix it. It takes all of us to fix it. So my thing to the progressive on the left, your rights is at stake, as they know. So do not vote for the woman. Just vote that's going to benefit you, benefit
You're
breaking up.
Again,
I already just said this about lady. Quit beating me up. Oh, wow. Send us home, J-Rod.
Well, okay.
Send us home, J-Rod.
I can do that. At the end of every day, there's one thing that every one of us have in common, and that is we are all in this together, whether we like it or not, enemies or friends. The close of every day, we're all in it together, and tomorrow's a new day, and we can hope for the best. So I thank you very much for David for putting this on for me, because I'm in jail, Eric. So another 25 days and I'm out.
Looks like house arrest to me.
Yeah, no shit. Yeah. So yes, thanks again for coming on, and we will most definitely do this again.
Absolutely. Well, David, thank you for hosting us and letting J-Rod take over, and really appreciate the opportunity to talk about all these, and happy to come back on when that audio works. And just, you know, regardless of what happens on election day, we get up, we move forward, and we don't give up.
That's right. Yep. So, all right, my friends, I'm out.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
Yes.
I don't know how to shut this dumb thing off, David.